Greetings. Today we delve into a secret that could have shattered the very foundations of World War II's final battles, the mysterious weapon known as the Tiny Tim. Imagine witnessing a colossal missile resembling a flying telephone pole being launched from a fighter plane at over 500 miles per hour, smashing through reinforced bunkers with a destructive force that collapses structures from within. What if I told you that in April of 1945, American forces deployed a weapon so powerful and unexpected that Japanese defenses, confident in their layered fortifications, had dismissed such threats as propaganda? Could a relatively small missile, barely a foot in diameter, carry enough explosive power to annihilate entire bunkers, transforming fighter aircraft into flying artillery? And what if this weapon, kept secret from most, changed the entire course of the Pacific War? In this video, we'll unravel the shocking truth behind the Tiny Tim, expose the gaps in Japan's defense strategy, and reveal how a secret American innovation threatened to rewrite history. The most astonishing part: the weapon's power was contained within a missile no larger than a large pipe, yet it possessed the destructive capacity of a battleship's main armament. The story begins now, as we uncover the hidden forces shaping the final days of the Pacific conflict. On the morning of April 16, in the year 1945, precisely at 6 o'clock, Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Manabe found himself stationed atop a cleverly camouflaged observation post that offered a panoramic view of Naha Harbor. Through his binoculars, he kept a sharp eye on the approaching aircraft, the first rays of dawn illuminating the scene. His gaze was fixed on a formation of American VAF-4 U Corsair fighters, their distinctive inverted gull wings shimmering as they approached from the northeastern direction. These aircraft were a familiar sight, their sleek shapes and aggressive profiles signaling another perilous reconnaissance or attack mission for the Japanese defenders. But as he watched, Manabe's attention was suddenly drawn to something entirely unexpected beneath those wings. Initially, he thought he was witnessing a renderings mistake. Was it some sort of unusually large missile or a peculiar piece of equipment? However, his sharp eyesight soon confirmed that what he observed was much more astonishing: colossal cylindrical objects trailing beneath the American fighters. They were enormous, utterly disproportionate to any conventional rocket or missile he had encountered before. In fact, they looked almost absurd, like flying telephone poles with a diameter of approximately 11.75 inches and a weight exceeding 200 pounds. These massive objects, with their elongated tubular forms, moved with an almost casual purposefulness, contrasting sharply with the sleek, agile fighters they were attached to. Before Manabe even had the chance to fully process the strange sight, the lead Corsair released one of these gigantic projectiles. As it extended away from the aircraft, a brief moment of silence was replaced by an intense glow. Suddenly, a fierce, vivid flame erupted from the rocket's tail, igniting a blazing jet of fire and smoke. The weapon was propelled forward with extraordinary speed, surpassing 500 miles per hour, clip after clip of it streaking at dizzying velocity toward the Japanese coastal defenses. The tension in Manabe's chest tightened as he watched the incoming missile calculate its trajectory. When the immense rocket finally made contact with the reinforced concrete bunker, an imposing structure that had had to withstand continuous naval bombardments over several weeks, the resulting explosion was unlike anything he had seen before. The explosion did not merely resemble a typical blast that might blow a structure to pieces. Rather, it seemed to demolish the very foundation of the bunker from within, as if the structure was collapsing inward on itself in a fleeting moment of catastrophic failure. Flames and debris erupted components of concrete, some as large as automobiles, soaring hundreds of feet airborne in an explosive cascade. The shock wave from the blast hit Manabe with such force that it pushed him several steps backward, despite his position over 800 meters away from the epicenter. Later, when Japanese military intelligence captured and analyzed American documents and intercepted communications, they learned that this destructive innovation was dubbed the Tiny Tim. The name was laced with ironic undertones because, to Manabe's astonishment, the weapon's startling power was contained within a missile of relatively modest size. Its tube was about 11.75 inches in diameter, a relatively manageable size for a projectile. Yet it packed a walloping punch, consisting of an explosive warhead loaded with nearly 148 pounds of TNT. In essence, it was akin to a flying torpedo, capable of delivering enormous destructive payloads. Remarkably, this formidable missile was designed to be launched from a single-engine fighter aircraft, a concept that dramatically expanded the offensive potential of American air striking force during the Battle of Okinawa. The revelation of the Tiny Tim's existence and capabilities sent shockwaves through the ranks of the Japanese Imperial Navy. Their initial assessment had been far different. They had based their assumptions on the likelihood that the United States would continue to rely on traditional bombs or simpler rockets, perhaps supplemented by the frequent kamikaze attacks their own pilots were executing. Their strategies had revolved around countermeasures tailored to those conventional threats. The mere idea that the Americans had essentially developed a weapon that combined the ship-shattering power of a battleship's main artillery with the precision and portability of a fighter bomber was truly unsettling. This newfound understanding altered their entire perspective on American air power. The Chinese wall of defenses constructed for their northern coast could no longer be relied upon solely to withstand bombardments of conventional ordnance. The Tiny Tim was capable of transforming every existing aircraft, be it the famed Corsair or the Hellcat, into a mobile artillery platform, armed with missiles that could obliterate the most fortified bunkers, concrete emplacements, and strategic points with frightening efficiency and precision. A mere 3 months prior, in January of the same year, high-ranking officials such as Vice Admiral Madagaki, stationed at Koya Air Base in southern Kyushu, had reviewed intelligence reports concerning American research into rocket development with an air of skepticism. Sitting in his command headquarters, he and his staff dismissed the many photographs and reconnaissance efforts that showed American fighters deploying what appeared to be oversized rockets. To them, these reports seemed exaggerated or manipulated propaganda. Throughout the extensive network of reinforced structures and concrete fortifications constructed across Okinawa and the various home islands, Japan believed they had created a defense capable of withstanding virtually any aerial assault it might face during the final stages of World War II. These fortifications were designed to absorb, disperse, and resist the onslaughts of enemy aircraft, and they were complemented by layered defensive strategies that combined extensive anti-aircraft positions, kamikaze attacks, and heavily fortified ground units, all aimed at discouraging or destroying incoming bombardments from American forces. Simpson and colleagues considered these defenses formidable and believed that it would take the heaviest naval bombardments, such as massive shelling from battleships and cruisers, before they could breach Japan's protective shell, let alone succeed in damaging the core military infrastructure. However, beyond these land-based barriers, there were darker developments in American military research that would pose a new, tremendous threat. Back in December of 1944, Captain Minor Genda, an astute and innovative military tactician who had played a pivotal role in orchestrating the attack on Pearl Harbor, had issued a stark warning regarding the United States' advancement in rocket technology. After analyzing intelligence gathered from the Eastern Campaign in the Philippines, Genda noted with concern that the conflicting reports and captured documents suggested that the United States Navy was making significant strides in designing and deploying high-powered air-to-ground rockets. Despite the seriousness of Genda's warning, the importance of this development was largely dismissed by Japan's high-ranking military leaders. These commanders remained confident in their layered defense system, rooted in kamikaze attacks, conventional airstrikes, and highly defensive fortifications, believing these measures would remain sufficient against any American weapon, regardless of how advanced it could become. Their conviction was reinforced by the prevailing assumption that new American weapons would not significantly alter the strategic landscape, especially given the formidable physical and engineering challenges they believed would restrict their production and deployment. Furthermore, specific associated concerns about the American attempt to weaponize rockets with their emerging super heavy classification were overlooked. Reports emerged describing the testing of extremely large rockets at American naval air stations, but these claims were dismissed as highly improbable. Many senior Japanese officers interpreted these reports as speculative or exaggerated, reasoning that the technical difficulties involved in launching and controlling such massive rockets from carrier-based aircraft, or aircraft in general, would be insurmountable. They preferred to believe in the limitations of physics and engineering, queuing on their own long-standing assumptions about rocket development. Meanwhile, in California, a groundbreaking scientific breakthrough was underway that would soon revolutionize aerial warfare. Yet the Japanese were entirely unaware of it. American scientists at the California Institute of Technology, in the midst of their research in 1944, had devised a novel method to launch some of the most formidable rockets of their era, the Tiny Tim missile. These scientists had succeeded in solving the previously perceived insurmountable problem of launching large rockets from aircraft, an obstacle that Japanese engineers had believed impossible to overcome. Their solution was an innovative drop launch system, whereby the rocket was released from the aircraft fall away before ignition, connected by a lanyard designed to ignite the engine only after safe separation was assured. This clever mechanism allowed even larger rockets to be deployed effectively from aircraft by minimizing the risk of unstable control or catastrophic failure during launch. However, the Japanese intelligence apparatus remained completely in the dark about this technological breakthrough, clutching onto their existing beliefs about the limitations of enemy capabilities. They firmed their conviction that physical and engineering constraints, limits to size, stability, and accuracy, would continue to hamper the development of American rockets at the scale they feared. As a result, they presumed the Americans' rockets would remain relatively small, less powerful, and suitable only for area bombardment, failing to see that a civil engineering and scientific revolution was already underway just across the Pacific. This misjudgment proved to be a fatal error. The emergence of the Tiny Tim missile symbolized not just a new type of weapon, but prompted a fundamental shift in aerial assault tactics. Unlike conventional fighters or bombers, which relied on large payloads or tactical versatility, the Tiny Tim's design allowed single-engine fighters, widely available and more maneuverable, to deliver devastating strikes capable of crippling naval ships or critical ground targets. It opened the door to a new era where precision, power, and range became intertwined, and where aviation tactics would be forever altered. Prior to his death in October of another year, Commander Masafumi Arma was among the few who envisioned these tectonic shifts. In a technical paper written before his untimely demise during one of the first organized kamikaze attacks, Arma contended that large-caliber aerial rockets could dramatically revolutionize naval warfare. If such an advanced weapon could be successfully developed and mass-produced, it could enable aircraft to strike and destroy warships from beyond the range of enemy anti-aircraft fire, essentially converting fighters into long-range artillery units capable of precision and destructive power previously thought the domain of heavy bombers and naval gunfire. Despite the threats Japan faced during the later stages of the Pacific War appeared concerning, but they did not seem revolutionary or game-changing at first glance. These threats, though causing material damage, did not fundamentally alter Japan's strategic calculations or the way its military planners envisioned their defense. Initially, the introduction of 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, often referred to by the Americans as Holy Moses, represented a new challenge. These particular rockets were more problematic than earlier threats due to their enhanced capabilities. They possessed sufficient punch to penetrate light armor and cause devastating damage to aircraft stationed on the ground. Nevertheless, from Japan's strategic perspective, these developments still fell within the anticipated range of threats. The existing Japanese tactical models and defensive measures appeared capable of counteracting such weapons without requiring a fundamental shift in doctrine. As time progressed, American engineering ingenuity produced even more formidable armaments. One significant leap was the development of the so-called Tiny Tim rocket, a weapon so powerful that initial intelligence reports caused disbelief among Japanese officers who assumed it was simply a minor upgrade stretching from perhaps 6 inches to 7 inches in diameter. Many of them rarely imagined that the United States could leap so drastically ahead, creating a bomb with an 11 3/4-inch bore, far surpassing previous designs. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most celebrated fighter aces, had survived severe injuries earlier in the war and was stationed at Yokosuka Naval Base by February of 1945. During that period, he attended a briefing focused on American weapons development, and he vividly remembered the dismissive attitude that prevailed among senior officers when the topic of these enormous new rockets arose. An intelligence officer brought up reports indicating that the Americans had begun testing giant rockets, and senior Japanese officers responded with overt skepticism, often mocking the news. One admiral joked openly that perhaps the Americans were planning to attach wings to 16-inch shells and fly them as aircraft hell-bent on destruction. Despite his respect for American industrial resources, Sakai found it difficult to believe in the practicality of deploying rockets larger than the German Nebelwerfer's derivatives from fighter aircraft. One of his main doubts centered around issues like the tremendous weight of these weapons and the recoil forces involved in firing them. Problems which, according to conventional wisdom at the time, should have been insurmountable obstacles to their use from small aircraft. There was also the danger posed to the launching platform, the aircraft itself, by the recoil blast and aerodynamic difficulties. Market realities, however, painted a vastly different picture. American industrial capacity and resourcefulness far exceeded what Japanese intelligence had presumed. The Tiny Tim program was supported by a range of resources that, from the Japanese viewpoint, looked almost miraculous. Instead of relying purely on new manufacturing infrastructure, the Americans repurposed existing oil well casing pipes, already being mass-produced due to their use in the petroleum industry, allowing for rapid production of rocket bodies without consuming critical military manufacturing capacity. Similarly, the warheads were adapted from existing 500-pound semi-armor-piercing bombs. Meanwhile, the rocket motors combined modified charges originally developed for the Holy Moses rocket program, utilizing proven components in creative assembly. This approach effectively bypassed the extensive developmental challenges that would typically accompany such upgrades, ones that could take years to resolve if begun from scratch. This pragmatic, results-oriented approach embodied an ideal typical of American wartime engineering: practical, efficient, and driven more by the to deliver effective results than by aesthetic or traditional engineering elegance. Far across the Japanese archipelago, at the Kurai Naval Base, a key stronghold where the remnants of Japan's once mighty navy now lay inert at anchor, Rear Admiral Kesu Kimura observed the beleaguered defenses around the port with growing apprehension. His flagship, the light cruiser Ioto, served as the command ship for the fleet's remaining vessels. With every passing day, Kimura's unease increased as he reviewed the defense preparations. Aware that inevitable American carrier strikes loomed on the horizon, he nonetheless believed that the concentrated anti-aircraft artillery and defenses assembled around Kurai, combined with the natural protective terrain formed by the surrounding hills, might afford some level of sanctuary. Kimura also drew courage from the fierce resolve of what remained of Japan's kamikaze pilots, whose sacrificial use of aircraft was seen as a last, desperate effort to inflict maximum damage. He hoped that their bravery, combined with Japan's layered defenses, could potentially delay or weaken the American onslaught before it inflicted decisive victory. A resolve reinforced by the almost stubborn belief that natural terrain features and well-coordinated anti-aircraft fire could act as a decisive deterrent against fierce American carrier-based assaults. Unmistakable sign that their previous understanding of naval defenses was quickly becoming outdated. These new weapons, small yet extraordinarily destructive, had suddenly rendered traditional ship armor and anti-aircraft strategies nearly worthless. The danger they posed was not just hypothetical, it was real and immediately felt on the waters surrounding Okinawa, where Japanese ships faced an ominous new threat. This threat, epitomized by the tiny yet immensely powerful rockets known as Tiny Tims, had begun to make its presence felt through a series of startling incidents during preparatory operations prior to the Okinawa invasion. When Japanese reports initially began describing these weapon systems, many in charge dismissed the accounts as mere exaggeration or the fruit of collective panic. One story circulated among coastal defense units claimed that an American fighter had destroyed a heavily fortified concrete ammunition bunker using just a single rocket, a feat that, given the engineering constraints others were aware of, seemed physically impossible. However, as the reports multiplied and more units attested to similar events, the scale of these weapons' lethality became hard to ignore. Witnesses began describing rockets of an unprecedented size, capable of penetrating deeply into ship or shore targets prior to igniting in devastating explosions. Such new capabilities challenged every assumption the Japanese military had about the effectiveness of their existing defenses, forcing a grim reconsideration of their tactical outlook. Senior commanders slowly began to grasp that these small guided missiles had the power to bypass their conventional armor and anti-aircraft defenses entirely, making earlier doctrines insufficient against such precision attacks. Among those quickly awakened to the gravity of this technological leap was Captain Toshiharu Inaguchi, who served as a senior staff officer responsible for kamikaze operations. In his diary entry dated April 18th, within the year of 1945, he noted that the emergence of these monster rockets, as the Japanese pilots affectionately or fearfully termed them, marked a nearly insurmountable psychological blow, almost as damaging as their physical destruction. The rocket's ability to strike repeatedly and effectively from significant distances starkly demonstrated that while Japan resorted to desperate measures, transforming many pilots into human-guided missile carriers in suicidal assaults, the Americans had achieved a level of destructive capability representing the pinnacle of modern warfare technology. This new reality underscored a rapidly widening technological chasm, almost a gulf, between Japan and the United States. Inaguchi reflected with concern that knowledge of these powerful weapons would deepen the already burgeoning sense of helplessness among Japanese forces, who were wrestling with the undeniable truth of American material superiority. The realization that the U.S. had developed precision-guided missiles potent enough to threaten both vessels and shore installations created a wave of apprehension, redefining their strategic position on the battlefield. A stark testament to the menacing capabilities of these rockets was the attack conducted on the Japanese destroyer escort, the Amati, on April 22, 1945. A squadron of Marine Corsair fighters from VMF 312 detected the vessel near Okinawa and launched a coordinated attack with their Tiny Tims. The destroyer's captain, Commander Masao Yamashita, was initially confident that his craft's maneuverability and its robust anti-aircraft armament would suffice to defend against aerial threats typical of previous attacks. Yet as the fighters released their rockets from well outside the ship's anti-aircraft range, that confidence was shattered. Spectators aboard the ship watched, horror-struck, as two of the projectiles streaked across the sky at an incredible velocity. One missile narrowly missed, passing just meters away from the stern, its engines glowing vividly in the bright Pacific sunlight. But the second rocket did not miss. It struck midship, smashing straight into the hull with lethal precision. Its warhead erupted inside the vessel, tearing through the structure, lifting and fracturing the ship's midsection with a tremendous explosion. The force was so overwhelming that the entire midship area was blown apart, snapping the keel and causing fatal, irreversible damage in mere moments. The immediate result was a catastrophic loss of life, with 93 brave sailors losing their lives in the blink of an eye. Such an example sent shockwaves through the Japanese naval ranks, as it vividly illustrated that traditional tactics, the belief that evading or defending against conventional aerial or artillery attacks was sufficient, was now obsolete in the face of this new guided missile threat. The psychological impact on the Japanese sailors was instant and profound, as the attack served as a stark confirmation that their defenses could no longer guarantee protection against such small but incredibly deadly projectiles. This incident, and others like it, underscored a major escalation in naval warfare, heralding an era where precision-guided missiles, even in miniature form, would fundamentally alter both offensive and defensive strategies at sea. The once dependable armor and anti-aircraft defenses were no longer adequate, forcing the Japanese military to confront an uncomfortable truth about the rapidly advancing technology that was reshaping the very nature of maritime warfare in the final chapters of World War II. The weaponization of this new long-range rocket fundamentally threatened many of the defensive capabilities that ships had relied upon throughout the war, transforming the naval battlefield in ways that had never been fully anticipated. These rockets could be launched from beyond the reach of conventional anti-aircraft defenses. Their precision and speed rivaled that of dive bombers, but with a critical advantage: they did not have to risk exposing luxury mariners of the attacker to concentrated enemy fire. Unlike traditional torpedoes, which might sometimes be evaded by skillful maneuvering or mitigated through effective damage control procedures, these rockets caused damage with a ruthless, unyielding speed reminiscent of top-tier naval gunfire, but with an added lethality. Their warheads, designed to penetrate armor and internal structures before unleashing the explosive force, inflicted destruction that was nearly impossible to control or contain once detonated. Among those who witnessed these attacks firsthand was Petty Officer Yoshio Nakamura, a survivor of the catastrophic sinking of the Amatsaki. During interrogations conducted by American forces, he provided detailed testimony about the moment the attack began. Nakamura recalled that the crew's initial alert was the sight of the rockets themselves, missile-like objects that resembled enormous, flaming telephone poles soaring through the sky. Their fiery, towering appearance contrasted sharply with the usual visual cues of aerial attack, making the danger even more intimidating. By the time the anti-aircraft guns had been swung into position, reactive in attempt to engamber these incoming threats, the rockets had already launched and were speeding toward their targets. The entire engagement from first sight to destructive impact lasted less than half a minute, an incredibly brief but devastating window of time that left no room for counteraction. Nakamura vividly described the sense of helplessness that overcame the crew, who were traditionally trained for conventional air raids and had minimal preparation for weapons that combined the astonishing range of naval artillery with the pinpoint accuracy of dive bombers. These rockets, capable of delivering their loads at speeds and distances previously associated only with fast-moving aircraft, had to be seen to be believed. Even just months earlier at Imperial headquarters in Tokyo, they would have been regarded as minor threats or experimental oddities. The rapid deployment of these new weapons prompted extensive debate among military officers. Army commanders, sensing the limited nature of their effectiveness and concerned about the reliability of the experimental systems entering combat, argued that such weapons were probably too few in number and too unreliable to change the course of the war. Conversely, Navy officers, who had already lost ships and knew the destructive potential firsthand, contended that these rapid-fire rockets marked a fundamental turning point in the struggle for naval dominance. Prominent military figures, such as Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, who was also the architect of Japan's kamikaze campaign, publicly expressed the idea that the American rockets represented a technological breakthrough that surpassed the human sacrifices of their suicidally brave pilots. Onishi reportedly emphasized that these rockets had effectively solved critical issues Japan had faced in trying to deliver devastating payloads against heavily armored targets. Instead of endangering soldiers' lives by sending individuals on perilous suicide missions, the United States had leveraged technological innovation to accomplish the same goal more efficiently, reliably, and at a scale impossible to match with human effort alone. Behind this technological marvel was a staggering industrial effort that Japanese military planners found almost unfathomable. While Japan was rapidly struggling to produce enough crude ammunition for its dwindling forces, scrambling for resources to sustain each kamikaze operation, the United States had established advanced production lines capable of mass manufacturing these enormous rockets. They repurposed surplus industrial materials, such as large pipeline or oil well casings used as the rocket bodies, which their industrial machinery could produce at a rate that would have absorbed the entirety of Japan's steel allotment for aircraft manufacturing. From the American perspective, this was merely a matter of reallocating surplus and existing capacity. Their industrial system was flexible enough to pivot sharply when necessary. Each of these rockets, known as the Tiny Tim, packed more explosive power than most Japanese fighter bombers could deliver through conventional bombing missions, representing a scale of destructive potential that was both staggering and revolutionary in naval warfare. The existence of the Tiny Tim missile, though relatively small in size, had a profound impact on the strategic landscape of the Pacific theater during the final months of World War II. Capable of being mounted in twin configurations on aircraft, these rockets promised a significant leap in offensive and destructive capability. The details of their deployment were confirmed by Lieutenant Commander Masae Kumiya, who was stationed at the Kanoya Air Base. On the 13th of May in the year 1945, Kumiya witnessed a remarkable demonstration of American technological innovation. During a daring raid orchestrated by Marine corsairs, the targets were Japanese airfields and their reinforcing structures, including hardened hangars, built to endure the most intense conventional bombings. These edifice-resistant hangars had withstood numerous incursions by the formidable B-29 superfortresses with only light damage, which underlined their robustness. However, the tiny Tim rockets proved to be a game-changing element, functioning effectively much like bunker-busting munitions, capable of penetrating the reinforced concrete roofs of these hardened structures. Once inside, the rockets would explode, devastating what older conventional weapons could hardly damage. One such home of supreme importance was a hangar housing 6 priceless Zero fighters, critical assets for Japan's air defenses. After being struck by the tiny Tim, the structure was obliterated entirely, resulting in an expanding smoking crater instead of the vital aircraft. Beyond the destruction of aircraft, a rocket that hit an adjacent runway created a sizable hole, which Japanese engineers took 3 days to repair, an effort that would have otherwise necessitated dozens of traditional bombs, demonstrating the disproportionate effectiveness of the tiny Tim. The Japanese Navy faced significant difficulties in devising any effective counters to this new threat. Their efforts proved futile, primarily because the rockets could be launched from distances that rendered anti-aircraft defenses largely useless. Their remarkable speed of over 500 miles per hour, which translates to approximately 225 meters per second, made it nearly impossible for visibility-based tracking once launched. This high velocity, coupled with their strategic deployment from favorable ranges, meant that traditional anti-airflower tactics lost much of their efficacy. Furthermore, the psychological impact on Allied gun crews was severe. Witnessing these immense rockets streaking through the sky cut down morale and often resulted in panic, causing a decrease in the overall accuracy and precision of defensive artillery. During this period, several Japanese officers began to colloquialize and refer to these missiles in a manner that reflected their intimidating presence, describing them as flying torpedoes or extended aerial lances. They drew a comparison to Japan's own feared Type 93 torpedo, an undefeated weapon in surface warfare. However, they also acknowledged that the Americans managed to achieve through aerial tactics what Japan had always excelled in on the surface. This comparison underscored how the shift in technological advantage was palpable and decisive. On the island of Okinawa, Colonel Hirami Yahara, who was the senior staff officer of the Japanese 32nd Army, recorded in his operational diary the disruptive effect the tiny Tim rockets had on their meticulously prepared defensive plans. Specifically, these rockets rendered many of their fortified defensive positions inadvisable for use, especially the coastal guns ingrained into caves and reinforced with concrete. These defenses had been regarded as nearly invulnerable to anything less than direct hits from main guns of battleships, once thought to be the ultimate in ramparts. Yet, the precision delivery capability of the tiny Tim, undertaken by fighter bombers operating from escort carriers, turned every American aircraft carrier into a shore bombardment platform rivaling a heavy cruiser in firepower. The regional significance was further exemplified in the attack on Naha Harbor on the 28th of April in 1945. Marine Corsairs from units FI-MF 312 and VMF 323 intercepted Japanese transport ships that attempted to unload supplies under the cover of darkness. The rockets played a critical role, striking these vessels with devastating power. Their effectiveness was vividly described by Captain Ichiro Tanaka of the transport vessel Nisho Maru. He recalled a single rocket tearing through the ship from bow to stern, with the explosion in the engine room causing the vessel to sink into the depths in less than 4 minutes. The sinking carried away thousands of tons of vital ammunition and food supplies, which could have bolstered the Okinawan defenders, but instead vanished in the sea tragedy. This technological disparity, highlighted starkly through the destructive capacity of the tiny Tim missile, exposed the multidimensional nature of wartime advancement. Its influence extended beyond mere destruction, reshaping strategic planning and tactics. These rockets signified more than just another weapon. They embodied an era where technological innovation could decisively tilt the balance of power, rendering traditional defenses obsolete while emphasizing the importance of speed, accuracy, and the ability to project destructive force from strategic distances. During a turbulent phase of military innovation, the Japanese naval engineers found themselves increasingly captivated by the extraordinary capabilities of Novaya Russia, which they believed to be a game-changer in aerial combat warfare. These pioneering scientists and technicians labored tirelessly to understand and replicate the sophisticated mechanisms behind these formidable weapons, recognizing that their development was grounded in several core technological breakthroughs. From the very essence of metallurgy, they had to utilize advanced metal alloys capable of withstanding extremely high pressures and searing temperatures, ensuring that rocket casings could endure the violent forces during launch and flight. Equally, the complex chemistry of the propellants was refined meticulously, allowing these engines to generate immense thrust efficiently without compromising the structural integrity of the rocket itself. The engineers also devoted significant attention to aerodynamic design, innovating shapes that preserved stability and balance despite the colossal size and weight of such weapons. These designs enabled the rocket to fly straight and true through potentially turbulent speeds and air currents, maximizing accuracy and destructive potential. Perhaps most impressively, they crafted a revolutionary launch system, an entirely novel method that permitted these enormous rockets to be deployed from single-engine fighters, a feat that our world had never seen before. The elegance of this solution, combining minimal aircraft modification with advanced missile technology, left many Japanese engineers astonished, openly admitting that they had not even conceived of such a possibility initially. In response to these unfolding developments, Rear Admiral Minoru Mieta, who headed the Imperial Japanese Navy's Aeronautical Department, scheduled an urgent emergency assembly on May 2, 1945. The primary agenda was to assess the emerging threat posed by these advanced weapons, which the Allies had begun deploying increasingly during the final months of the war. The gathered military strategists, scientists, and engineers discussed potential countermeasure strategies, but their deliberations were marred by limited options. The best defenses they could muster were dispersal tactics, trying to spread out their remaining ships to reduce vulnerability, and camouflage measures to avoid detection. Yet they were pragmatic enough to understand the grim reality. Japan lacked the industrial capacity, the resources, and the precious time needed to develop a comparable arsenal of weapons. Furthermore, the existing anti-aircraft defenses, which were already under extreme strain from relentless conventional air raids, were fundamentally ill-equipped to neutralize these high-speed, precision-guided rockets launched from ranges far beyond their interception capabilities. It became painfully clear that the anti-aircraft artillery batteries simply were not designed to engage targets at such extended distances or at such high velocities, rendering their effectiveness negligible. As a result, Mieta concluded in his comprehensive report to the Naval General Staff that the Tiny Tim, a missile of remarkable innovation and destructive power, represented not merely a more potent version of traditional threats, but a fundamentally different kind of weapon system altogether. Its technological prowess indicated a leap in American military capability, transcending conventional combat tactics and firearms. The most striking demonstration of the Tiny Tim's devastating potential came during the Allied bombings in July of 1945, particularly targeting the Karai Naval Base, which at the time was a stubborn refuge for remnants of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The ships docked there, severely weakened by shortages of fuel and supplies, had nonetheless retained significant defensive firepower, particularly their anti-aircraft batteries, adding to their defenses. Rear Admiral Mikoa, in command of the battleship Nagato, a formidable vessel midway through its service life, had strategically positioned his flagship deep within a calm cove at Yokosuka, surrounded by anti-aircraft positions and expecting that any attack would need to break through layers of enemy fire. His crew believed they could withstand aerial assaults. But on July 18th, things drastically changed. The American forces launched an attack that featured the novel use of Tiny Tim rockets, and these weapons proved to be a harbinger of a new era in aerial warfare. According to some eyewitness accounts, at least one of the rockets may have been a dud, yet the overall attack demonstrated the terrifying power of the weapon, delivering profound damage, potentially even knocking completely through Nagato's hull. The psychological impact against the Japanese sailors was utterly devastating. They had believed their battleships to be nearly invulnerable, but now they realized that a single-engine fighter, armed with a tiny rocket, could threaten even such behemoths, rendering their once impenetrable ships vulnerable in a way never before imagined. The attack pattern employed by the American fighters was designed to maximize both deceptions and impact. The squadron of Corsair and Hellcat fighters would first approach the target at high altitude, beyond the reach of the ship's anti-aircraft guns, forcing the Chinese defenses to remain passive. They would then briefly dive, launching their rockets at extremely close range, and immediately pull away before the Japanese gunners could react effectively. This tactic nullified the traditional kinematic advantages that Japanese anti-aircraft missiles could exploit, leaving the defenders disoriented and exposed. Once fired, these tiny rockets became nearly unstoppable in flight. Their solid fuel engines burned fiercely for mere seconds, just enough to accelerate. In the relentless course of the Kurai raids, the seemingly futile efforts to mount a successful defense against the devastating Tiny Tim rocket attacks became increasingly evident. Military analysts and combat veterans alike observed that these rockets were frequently launched from distances exceeding 2,000 meters, a range far beyond what the standard 25mm anti-aircraft artillery could effectively cover or even threaten. By the time larger, more powerful 127mm artillery pieces could turn their formidable barrels towards the incoming threat, the rockets were often already closing in, their high velocity and relatively small size rendering them exceptionally difficult to target and shoot down successfully. This situation created a stark psychological toll on the gun crews. Witnessing the bright, blazing tracers of massive rockets streaking toward their positions, trailing flames that flickered and danced through the sky, induced panic and often caused artillery crews to abandon their posts, even when ordered to maintain their positions. The emotional impact was compounded by the realization that these weapons, though few in number, could inflict disproportionate destruction and undermine even well-prepared defensive lines. Furthermore, the presence of such weapons cast a long shadow over the morale of Japanese forces. The Tiny Tim represented a potent symbol of what Japan was no longer able to achieve in terms of technological and industrial prowess. It stood for the loss of overwhelming industrial capacity, cutting-edge technological innovation, and the ability to project formidable, precise firepower without incurring heavy losses of aircraft and pilots, something that had once been Japan's hallmark. In stark contrast to Japan's decreasing ability to defend its skies and maintain nuclear and conventional air superiority, the Americans had successfully developed a suite of weapons that not only outmatched Japanese defenses, but also did so while conserving their trained manpower and costly aircraft. The United States' strategy of employing advanced, high-yield guided munitions, as well as guided bombs, represented a sustainable and cost-effective approach to aerial warfare, a method that Japan found increasingly impossible to counter. This technological edge allowed them to continue their campaigns with fewer aircraft and pilot losses, a critical advantage in a war largely defined by attrition. As the conflict advanced into its final phases, many Japanese officers whispered in private about the reality of their predicament, quietly acknowledging that the war was essentially unwinnable. Among them was Commander Toshiyuki Yokoi, a seasoned staff officer serving within the 5th Air Fleet. In his post-war memoirs, Yokoi recounted how the sudden and internationally significant appearance of Tiny Tim rockets in early 1945 convinced him that not only did Japan suffer from outnumbered forces, but also from a dangerous qualitative gap that could never be bridged under current conditions. While Japanese engineers struggled desperately to keep their vintage aircraft flying amid dwindling supplies of materials and fuel, the Americans were deploying an array of advanced weapon systems that seemed to belong to a different technological age altogether. These American innovations transformed the aerial battlefield. Rockets that effectively turned each fighter into a flying artillery platform, guided bombs capable of striking with unprecedented precision over wide-scale targets, and proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells that made defending against air attacks nearly suicidal. The sheer scale of American production and technological sophistication was staggering. After the war, Japanese officers learned with disbelief that tens of thousands of these Tiny Tim rockets had been manufactured. Despite their complexity, the Americans employed mass production techniques that Japan's dwindling industrial base could never have replicated, even at its peak. Techniques that ensured consistent quality and high output rates, levels that would have demanded utilizing every ounce of Japan's entire munitions industry. This one weapon was just one among dozens of new and increasingly formidable systems deployed by the Americans in the final year of the war. The scale and sophistication of these weapons drove home the terrible hopelessness facing Japan, revealing an ever-widening chasm of technological and industrial disparity. During interrogation after the conflict, Vice Admiral Tao Kurita, a veteran of the Battle of Leyte Gulf and veteran commander of the Cent Force, remarked that the appearance of weapons like the Tiny Tim had validated his decision to withdraw from the battle. He understood then that if the Americans could develop and field such devastating tactical weapons while still maintaining leverage through numerical superiority and refined training, the degree of Japan's strategic disadvantage had grown insurmountable. In the face of this relentless tide of American innovations, Japan found itself increasingly on the defensive, grasping at straws in a war it could no longer sustain, an unadjustable reality illustrated by technological progress that rendered previous tactics ineffective and force structures hopelessly outdated. The relentless march of American weapon development not only emphasized the technological supremacy of the United States, but also underscored the tragic decline of Japan's once commanding military industry. A decline that many Japanese leaders could do little but acknowledge with a sense of defeat that increasingly transcended the battlefield. The prospect of engaging in any naval confrontation at that late stage of the war would not have merely resulted in defeat but in complete annihilation. It was a grim reality that deeply influenced strategic considerations at the time. Ironically, the very program that many military leaders initially opposed, namely the deployment of the Tiny Tim rockets, began to appear almost provably rational when faced with the brutal reality of the overwhelming technological superiority wielded by the Allied forces. This shift in perspective underscores how, in the face of seemingly insurmountable technological strength, even previously dismissed weapons could once again be viewed as vital components of warfare. On August the 9th of the year 1945, which was the same day that the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, an attack was carried out against the Sasebo naval base in Japan. This assault marked one of the final instances in World War II where the Tiny Tim rockets were discharged in active combat. During this operation, units of Marine Corsairs from Task Force 38 launched strikes against the remaining Japanese vessels that were still operational at the time. These rockets, some of the last to be fired during the conflict, demonstrated their lethal efficacy. From a concealed observation post, then Commander Takashi Yamamoto observed the bombardment and characterized the strikes as incredibly precise and relentless. He described the rockets' destructive power as almost clinical, their impact obliterating a submarine depot completely and inflicting severe damage on 2 escort vessels with sharply measured efficiency. Remarkably, the aircraft delivering these rockets never even approached the proximity of the base's robust anti-aircraft defenses, rendering what could have been a costly and dangerous attack into a near-flawless, one-sided slaughter. The role of the Tiny Tim rockets extended beyond their physical capabilities. Their psychological impact was no less formidable. American military strategists carefully managed this aspect of warfare by disseminating leaflets and radio broadcasts that vividly outlined the destructive potential of these flying battleship shells. These communications emphasized how the rockets could annihilate any target, penetrating deep bunkers, sinking ships, and destroying critical installations at will. The knowledge that American fighters could deliver such devastating firepower with relative safety within the established air defense zones severely undermined Japanese morale. In the face of these formidable threats, the Japanese forces encountered an eroding sense of purpose and resilience. Many seasoned officers, during private conversations, came to admit that their resistance had evolved from being fervently tenacious to seeming largely pointless, ineffective, and futile against such advanced technological warfare. The demeanor of the Japanese military during those final months was increasingly marked by a sense of hopelessness and resignation, amplified by the relentless and precise damage inflicted from the air. Reflecting on these developments, Captain Mitsuo Fuka, who famously commanded the Japanese fleet during the attack on Pearl Harbor and who survived the war, wrote extensively in his memoirs about the significance of the Tiny Tim rocket. He regarded this weapon as the ultimate embodiment of American industrial might, a weapon that combined seemingly crude initial concepts with sophisticated execution that drew upon advances in chemical sciences, metallurgy, aeronautics, and engineering. The rocket, essentially a massive missile, exemplified how a fundamentally simple idea could be elevated to a formidable weapon through technological innovation. Fuka observed that, although Japan had begun the war with what was considered an edge in aircraft and tactical methods, by the year 1945, the balance of power had been decisively shifted. In his view, Japanese forces had become akin to samurai wielding swords, facing enemies armed with modern machine guns and bombers, a disparity so stark that it rendered traditional notions of battlefield courage and bravado irrelevant in the face of technological dominance. The introduction of the Tiny Tim and similar cutting-edge weapons iterated such a transformation into an unmistakably clear tableau of power. Following the war, the Imperial Japanese Navy conducted a thorough evaluation of the Tiny Tim's effectiveness. This assessment was included in reports intended for the post-war United States strategic bombing surveys and military analyses. It concluded that, despite the weapon's relatively limited usage numbers, its tactical effects far exceeded expectations. The rockets were successful in destroying key military installations, sinking significant Allied vessels, and perhaps most consequentially, delivering a harsh psychological blow to Japanese forces. They made it brutally clear that resistance was essentially pointless, given the enemy's ability to develop and employ such advanced weaponry, while simultaneously maintaining widespread operational control across the Pacific. Several Japanese officers, after witnessing the destructive capacity of the Tiny Tim rockets and similar superweapons, publicly acknowledged, albeit with some reluctance, that the inevitability of defeat had become undeniably clear to them by early 1945. Many believed that Japan's inevitable surrender was not simply a matter of time, but a certainty, driven home in their minds by the terrifying potency of the American technological arsenal. The story of the Tiny Tim's influence on Japanese military morale and strategy reveals a profound truth about the wider context of the Pacific War. It demonstrates not merely the destructive capacity of advanced weaponry, but also how technological innovation can. During the final phase of the conflict, it became evident that, beyond the destructive power of atomic bombs and the relentless B-29 bomber raids, a new frontier of warfare was being often demonstrated, one marked by advanced rocket technology that highlighted the ever-growing technological abyss separating the combatants. These innovative rockets, which played a crucial role in the latter stages of the war, served every day as unmistakable symbols of the formidable technological superiority possessed by the American forces. Every Japanese soldier and sailor, witnessing these developments firsthand, could grasp the magnitude of this disparity. Rockets of a size and destructive capability that far exceeded anything Japan had on its own arsenal. Such weapons could obliterate well-fortified structures in mere seconds, fortresses that had taken months to construct, thus turning the tide of battle through sheer lethality rather than physical proximity. This relentless demonstration of American might gradually wore down Japanese morale in a way that no amount of propagandist messaging could match. It was a tangible, ever-present reminder of the technological gap that placed Japan at a significant disadvantage. After the war, Rear Admiral Somu Toyota, who served as the final chief of the Naval General Staff, explicitly acknowledged that weapons like the Tiny Tim rocket and other similar advanced ordnance effectively rendered Japan's traditional defensive strategies obsolete. His assessment pointed out that Japan's wartime defensive doctrine had revolved around the assumption that American forces would need to approach within range of Japan's established defenses, whether through conventional aerial bombing, naval gunfire, or ground assaults, to deliver effective strikes. However, rockets like the Tiny Tim radically changed the strategic landscape by enabling American forces to operate from a protected standoff distance. This allowed them to systematically destroy Japanese military capabilities without exposing their own troops or vessels to direct counterfire. These weapons transformed what would have been combat, a fierce, drawn-out engagement, into what Admiral Toyota dubbed a form of execution, where the enemy was eliminated with ruthless precision from afar. When Japanese engineers studied the technical specifications of the Tiny Tim after the war, They understood at a profoundly detailed level just how far U.S. military technology had progressed. The rocket, which was powered by a motor featuring 24 nozzles, remarkably maintained stable thrust despite its size, a technical achievement that Japan had failed to emulate. The design demonstrated a level of sophistication, especially considering the mechanical time fuse capable of being set to trigger detonations at specific depths after penetration. Such technological finesse in ammunition design was far beyond the reach of Japan's wartime industry, which struggled to produce reliably complex missile systems. Moreover, the fact that these rockets proved to be sufficiently dependable for routine combat use conveyed that American manufacturing and quality control standards had surpassed Japanese capabilities, even during peacetime periods. The reliability and consistency embedded in these weapons reflected an advanced level of industrial maturity and logistical organization. During post-war interrogations, Lieutenant General Torishiro Kawabe, Vice Chief of the Japanese Army's General Staff, frankly admitted that Japan's military planners seriously underestimated the impact of American advances in tactical missile technology. Instead, their focus was primarily on strategic bombing campaigns and conventional ground forces, both deemed crucial during earlier stages of the war. He confessed that the advent of rockets capable of delivering heavy warheads with pinpoint accuracy had rendered many of their protective measures, particularly the extensive fortifications constructed across the home islands, virtually obsolete. These forts, designed to withstand massive conventional bombing raids, would have been utterly vulnerable to precise missile strikes capable of delivering powerful warheads that could penetrate and destroy considerable underground or fortified structures. The financial aspect of the Tiny Tim program further underscored its significance to Japanese military commanders. After the war, the expenses incurred by the United States in developing and manufacturing these rockets appeared almost staggering. It was revealed that the costs associated with the entire Tiny Tim project exceeded the sum allocated for Japan's entire naval aviation budget in the year 1945. This startling comparison vividly illustrated the scale of American military investment and technological ambition. To put it in perspective, the funds spent on perfecting and producing these sophisticated rockets represented only a tiny sliver, barely a fraction, of America's overall wartime military expenditures. This contrast underscored a sobering reality. Japan had found itself confronting an industrial power capable not only of sustained technological innovation across multiple domains, but also of mobilizing resources on an unprecedented scale. The Japanese leadership recognized that this relentless pursuit of military and technological dominance confirmed who the true war machines of the conflict were. The small but highly advanced rockets like the Tiny Tim exemplified America's broader capacity to pursue and realize complex, cutting-edge weapon systems, an endeavor powered by industry and technological expertise well beyond Japan's reach at that stage of the war. During the final stages of the conflict, the Japanese military was engaged in the formidable challenge of simultaneously developing multiple advanced weapon systems, all while attempting to sustain their existing conventional forces. These traditional forces, in fact, vastly outnumbered and outgunned their American counterparts by a significant margin, measured not just in numbers, but also in technological disparity. This contextual backdrop set the stage for a technological arms race that was as much about innovation as it was about resilience. Commander Yoshimatsu Nakajima, who had played a pivotal role in devising the Japanese defensive strategy for Kyushu in anticipation of a potential American invasion, observed a game-changing factor: the advent of the Tiny Tim rocket. Nakajima noted that this new weapon had rendered many of their prior tactical assumptions about U.S. assault methods obsolete. In their planning, the Japanese had believed that coastal defenses, comprising bunkers, gun emplacements, and fortified command posts, would be crucial in compelling American naval forces to remain at safe standoff distances. This distance, they assumed, would reduce the destructive potential of pre-invasion bombardments, giving Japanese forces a tactical advantage. However, with the introduction of fighters capable of delivering 12-inch caliber warheads with lethal precision from escort carriers located far offshore, a startling reality emerged. Every vulnerable point, be it a cave opening in the cliffs, a coastal artillery position, or a command hub, was easily accessible to these fast, accurate strikes. This capability meant that the Americans could systematically target and destroy vital military infrastructure long before the first landing craft made shore, thereby eroding Japan's strategic position well in advance of any ground assault. The disparity between Japanese and American wartime philosophies became unmistakably stark in the context of weapons like the Tiny Tim. The Japanese had traditionally sought to compensate for their material shortages through a belief in their spiritual superiority and a willingness to sacrifice human life, approaches epitomized by their kamikaze tactics. Contrastingly, the Americans prioritize industrial efficiency and innovative technological development to produce weapons that inflicted superior battlefield damage, while inventously minimizing their own fatalities. This fundamental difference in strategic worldview, not just technological, manifested vividly in the deployment of weapons, such as the Tiny Tim rocket. Each of these rockets, streaking across the skies of the Pacific, symbolized more than merely advanced military hardware. They represented a profound ideological chasm. The Japanese conception of warfare was rooted in the idea of relentless sacrifice, often delving into civilizational ideals of honor and endurance. Meanwhile, the American approach emphasized scientific progress, industrial strength, and calculated precision, principles designed to achieve victory with the least sacrifice of their own troops. The dissonance between these philosophies underscored the civilizational clash at the heart of the Pacific War, illustrating that the ultimate defeat of Japan was not simply a matter of military tactics, but a confrontation of mutually incompatible worldviews regarding the nature and strategy of modern warfare. Subsequent analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey documented that the Tiny Tim rockets had inflicted considerable physical damage, destroying or severely damaging over 40 Japanese vessels, ranging from destroyers to merchant ships, and wreaking havoc upon countless shore installations. Yet numbers alone failed to do justice to the wider impact of these weapons. Much more substantial was the psychological blow, an unmistakable demonstration of American technological superiority that shook Japanese confidence and morale. The visual spectacle of the Tiny Tim's destructive power eroded Japanese defenses and contributed heavily to the breakdown of organized resistance, ultimately leading to Japan's capitulation and acceptance of unconditional surrender. Ironically, the name Tiny Tim, implying something diminutive and perhaps insignificant, belied the true destructive force the weapon wielded. Post-war analysts keenly noted that this naming was a reflection of Native American bravado, confidence, and an often jocular attitude toward fears of their own technological dominance. There was a certain bravado, a storytelling optimism, that accompanied the depiction of such advances. It symbolized the Americans' belief in their unprecedented military innovation. Several Japanese military officers, particularly those who had a direct experience with the devastation wrought by these rockets, admitted that the casualness with which the Americans regarded these powerful weapons was deeply demoralizing. It reinforced the idea that American superiority extended beyond technology into a sense of cultural and industrial dominance, so pronounced that they could afford to joke about weapons that would have previously been regarded as wonder weapons by other nations. Captain Teikai Kanashi, one of the last surviving destroyer commanders, reflected with resignation on how the Tiny Tim had rendered his entire tactical doctrine obsolete. Traditional destroyer warfare revolved around qualities like speed, maneuverability, and formidable firepower, all vital to defend against aerial threats, formidable properties that had underpinned their battlefield strategies for decades. But the advent and deployment of rockets, such as the Tiny Tim, fundamentally altered this landscape, challenging established doctrines and forcing a reassessment of modern naval combat. Many believe that with the combination of technologically advanced rockets, dive bombers, and powerful missile systems, the old modes of the advent of advanced weaponry during the final stages of the conflict marked a turning point that had profound implications for traditional naval combat. By a certain point, it became apparent that rockets of impressive range and destructive power, comparable to those of floating cruiser shells, could be launched from positions far beyond the reach of enemy guns. This development effectively shifted the balance of power, leaving even the most agile and heavily armed destroyers almost defenseless against a determined aerial assault that employed such precision-guided weaponry. Their agility and speed, once critical advantages on the battlefield, were rendered largely irrelevant when facing explosive projectiles capable of athletic long-range strikes. It was in this context that one observer, with a tone of professional respect, recognized that the American military forces had achieved remarkable progress in a matter of only a few months. Behind these achievements lay a challenge that had previously confounded naval tacticians for decades: the dilemma of how to deliver large, devastating payloads from aircraft with pinpoint accuracy, all while safeguarding planes from the enemy's defensive fire. A challenge that seemed insurmountable for much of the war. The final, tangible testament to this technological seismic shift arrived in August of 1945, just as Japan was on the brink of surrender. By this point, the Japanese military's top commanders, including Admiral Somu Toyota, had diligently assessed the evolving threat. During a personnel meeting at that time, he admitted that weapons like the American Tiny Tim, a name evocative of both venom and victory, had transformed the strategic landscape. According to reports, he acknowledged that these rockets made it not just unwise but outright suicidal for Japan to continue sustained resistance. The doctrinal concept of fighting on became increasingly hopeless, because Japan lacked the means to counter American standoff weapons that could systematically obliterate fortified positions without exposing their own forces to peril. Toyota further revealed that the persistent appearance of such weapons towards the war's end was a critical turning point in his own judgment. It convinced him beyond any doubt that options such as surrender or combat to the last are inevitable, or at the very least, the only rational pathways remaining when facing annihilation. The impact of the Tiny Tim rocket on Japanese military consciousness endured long after the fighting ceased. Veterans recounted how the distinct sound of the rocket's scream, a terrifying, ripping wail announcing incoming destruction, became indelibly etched in their memories. The sight of American aircraft, Corsairs and Hellcats, proudly flying into the battle zone, ruthlessly delivering these massive warheads transformed from mere tactical maneuvers into potent symbols of America's technological superiority. These images pervaded countless memoirs and historical accounts, capturing a moment when individual officers and soldiers realized with frightening clarity that their country's defeat was irreversible, not through decisive battles of strategic importance alone, but because of the relentless collection of tactical, technical victories that rendered their bravery increasingly insignificant in the face of technological inevitability. This single weapon, the Tiny Tim rocket, embodied everything that Japan had fundamentally failed to anticipate about American warfare. It exemplified the rapid pace of American technological innovation, showcasing the industry's capacity not only to develop revolutionary weapon systems swiftly, but also to produce them in quantities sufficient to sustain multiple strikes. Equally important was the military's ability to train personnel and organize logistics around these new advances, ensuring their effective deployment. Perhaps most crucial, it reflected a mental agility within the United States Armed Forces that allowed them to tackle complex technical problems through creative and unconventional solutions, often once deemed impossible within the framework of traditional military thinking. As this specialized rocket arrived onto the scene during the war's closing months, it encapsulated why Japan's defeat extended far beyond mere battlefield setbacks, highlighting America's comprehensive dominance in every dimension of modern warfare. This sequence of technological victories underscored that victory depended not just on the bravery of individual soldiers or the might of armies, but increasingly on the capacity to outthink, outproduce, and outmaneuver the enemy through innovation and industrial strength. The story of Japan's confrontation with the Tiny Tim rocket remains a vivid and powerful reminder that in modern conflicts, technological sophistication can fundamentally diminish the value of traditional military virtues such as courage, discipline, and sacrifice. When facing an opponent capable of launching a 12,200-pound projectile at 500 miles per hour, which can demolish fortified bunkers or even pierce the keel of a destroyer, no amount of resolve alone could mitigate the deadly physics involved. The rocket's effective launch, from beyond the range of any defensive weapons, by pilots who could return to strike repeatedly, provided a sustainable, technological solution that altered the very principles of tactical warfare, illustrating clearly that victory in contemporary warfare often hinges on the latest innovations rather than raw human endurance. In the aftermath of the conflict, Japan faced a series of difficult problems rooted in the sacrifices its people had made. Sacrifices that, in many ways, seemed unsustainable and driven by a determination to achieve victory at almost any cost. Decades after the guns fell silent and the bitter war was finally over, former adversaries who had once been locked in brutal combat found themselves forging strategic alliances, and the shared goal of rebuilding and securing their nations fostered a new kind of relationship. In this period of transition, officers from Japan's self-defense forces, many of whom had trained and studied at American military academies, began to exhibit a keen professional curiosity about the innovations and tactics that had reshaped modern warfare. One phenomenon that drew particular interest was the Tiny Tim rocket, a weapon whose performance and destructive power suddenly underscored how much the character of aerial combat had shifted since the previous global conflict. These Japanese officers often requested demonstrations of the rocket's capabilities, not out of nostalgia for the war years, but from a genuine desire to understand the technological leap that had transformed strategic military thinking. They recognized that this weapon symbolized more than just destructive force. It represented the dawn of a new era where the dynamics of warfare advanced rapidly and insistently, making pre-war doctrines obsolete almost overnight. Meanwhile, American military instructors who observed these requests noted a complex blend of emotions in their Japanese counterparts. There was an undeniable admixture of awe and admiration, reactions to the engineering prowess that produced the Tiny Tim rocket, a miraculous example of technological ingenuity. Yet this admiration was tinged with a sense of regret, a regret rooted in the realization that Japan had failed to recognize the radical transformation that was occurring or to adapt swiftly enough. In essence, these officers understood all too well that their nation's leaders had fought the war of the middle 1940s, heavily anchored in the paradigms and tactics of the early 1920s or even the 1930s. They had approached the new challenges of the war with a mindset rooted in the tactics and technology of the previous generation, only to be confronted with adversaries, both new and emerging, who were already developing and deploying the weapons destined to shape the future of conflict. This misalignment between strategy and technological evolution underscored the peril of clinging to outdated modes of thinking amid a rapidly changing battlefield landscape. Japan's attempt to fight the war in 2045 using a mindset from 2041 not only demonstrated a tragic inability to adapt, but also highlighted how critical innovation and foresight are in modern military endeavors. The sobering reflection of these experts was a testament to how crucial it is for nations to continuously evolve their strategies and technologies, lest they fall irreparably behind in a world defined increasingly by technological supremacy and rapid change.